Imagine holding a letter in your hands, a letter that tells you exactly what is coming. A letter written in plain language with exact coordinates, describing the very thing that will kill you. Now imagine reading it and putting it in your pocket. This is not a story about an iceberg. Icebergs don't make decisions. They don't choose victims. They just exist, enormous and indifferent, doing what nature built them to do. This is a story about the people who knew, who were warned, who had every piece of information they needed to prevent one of the greatest disasters in human history. And still, the ship sank. In April of 1912, the world felt invincible. The Industrial Revolution had remade civilization from the ground up. Steam power, electric light, wireless communication. Humanity had conquered nature at every turn, and there was no reason to believe that was about to stop. Into this world sailed the RMS Titanic, the physical embodiment of everything humanity believed about itself. She stretched 882 feet from bow to stern. She weighed 46,328 tons. She had a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, a squash court, and a first-class dining saloon that put the finest restaurants in London to shame. She carried 2,224 people, millionaires and immigrants, engineers and dreamers, all aboard the same floating city, crossing the same ocean, sharing the same fate. The word unsinkable followed her everywhere. The White Star Line never officially printed it in their marketing materials, but they didn't correct anyone who said it either. Why would they? It was the best advertisement money couldn't buy, and the press ran with it. The public believed it. The passengers toasted to it over crystal glasses of champagne somewhere in the North Atlantic. And at the head of it all stood Captain Edward John Smith, 62 years old, white-bearded, deeply respected, and impossibly calm. He had spent 4 decades at sea. He had commanded more voyages than most men would dream of. This crossing was meant to be his retirement gift, his final command before he stepped ashore for the last time. The first warning arrived at 9 a.m. on Sunday, April 14, 1912. The message came from the SS Caronia, already navigating the same stretch of the North Atlantic. It was direct. Bergs, growlers, and field ice in the area ahead. The wireless operator carried it to the bridge. Captain Smith read it, nodded, and posted it on the chart room notice board. The engines continued turning at full speed, 22.5 knots. The second warning came just before noon, from the Dutch liner SS Noordam. Same region, same message, ice ahead. What's worth asking here is not simply what Smith did, but why. Why would an experienced captain receive 2 ice warnings and not reduce speed? In 1912, it was considered entirely normal to sail through ice-adjacent waters at full speed. It was industry practice. Dozens of captains had done it hundreds of times and arrived safely. The belief was not that ice wasn't dangerous. It was that a ship moving quickly could spot and avoid it in time. The third warning arrived at 1:42 in the afternoon, and this one came with a personal touch. The Baltic, a White Star Line vessel, practically family, transmitted a message warning of large quantities of field ice and icebergs in the Titanic's path. This message was handed directly to Captain Smith while he stood on the promenade deck, chatting with passengers in the afternoon sun. He read it, he folded it, and he passed it to J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of White Star Line, who had personally boarded the Titanic for its maiden voyage. Ismay pocketed it. Captain Smith retrieved the warning later that evening and finally posted it in the chart room. Those hours mattered, every one of them. At 1:45 p.m., the fourth warning came in from the German vessel America. Large icebergs directly ahead, exact coordinates, specific, verifiable, actionable information. But this one got lost before it even reached the captain. The Titanic's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were under extraordinary pressure that afternoon. The wireless equipment had broken down the day before and only been repaired that morning leaving a massive backlog of passenger messages unprocessed. The America's warning was logged, but in the chaos, it was not relayed urgently to the officers on the bridge. A specific warning about large icebergs directly in the ship's path, buried under socialites' dinner invitations and stock market updates. By early evening, the temperature had begun to drop in a way that should have spoken for itself. Experienced sailors had a phrase for it: the cold smell of ice. The thermometer fell steadily through the early hours of the night. There is something important to understand about Captain Smith at this point. This was not a man acting against his better judgment. The ship had a double hull, 16 watertight compartments, technologies the maritime world had never seen before. He was not dismissing the danger out of laziness. The fifth warning arrived at 7:30 p.m. from a ship called the Californian. The Californian's captain, Stanley Lord, had already made a very different decision that evening. He had encountered such a dense field of ice that he chose to stop his ship entirely. His warning to the Titanic was clear: large amounts of ice in the area. Stop, or at least slow down. The Titanic received it, acknowledged it, and continued at full speed. By 9:30 p.m., Captain Smith had said goodnight to the officers on the bridge and retired to his cabin. Command passed to First Officer William Murdoch. The ship was moving through total darkness. No moon, no clouds. Here is where the night becomes almost unbearable to think about. Under normal conditions, when a wave strikes the base of an iceberg, it creates a white foam, a visible ring that lookouts can spot from a distance. The ice simply sits in the dark, invisible until it's too late. And the lookouts searching for it, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, stationed in the crow's nest 95 feet above the deck. A set had been left behind in Southampton when the ship departed. They had been scanning the horizon for hours, in freezing temperatures, with nothing but their naked eyes. One ship moving at nearly 25 miles per hour through an ocean field full of ice. At 11 p.m., the sixth and final warning came through the wireless room. It was from the Mesaba, and it was the most detailed and alarming of them all. The Mesaba had encountered a massive ice field, dense, extensive, packed with large bergs. Jack Phillips received it. He was still buried in Cape Race passenger traffic, behind on hours of backlogged messages, exhausted. He set the Mesaba's warning aside, intending to deal with it after catching up. The night pressed on. Inside the ship, passengers slept or played cards or finished late drinks at the bar. The Titanic moved forward in the darkness at full speed, carrying 2,224 people, towards something that 6 separate messages had tried to warn them about. At 11:39 p.m., Frederick Fleet leaned forward in the crow's nest. Something was wrong with the darkness ahead. He grabbed the crow's nest bell and struck it 3 times. He seized the telephone. Iceberg, right ahead. On the bridge, First Officer Murdoch looked up. He saw it immediately. A black mass rising from the black water. Stop engines, then full reverse. The Titanic began to turn, slowly. It takes time it doesn't always have. 37 seconds passed between Fleet's warning and the impact. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic's starboard side connected with the underwater shelf of the iceberg, the hidden mass below the surface, which is always far larger than what floats above. Passengers described a low grinding sound. In the boiler rooms, the story was different. Fireman Frederick Barrett was standing in Boiler Room 6 when the hull opened beside him. 5 compartments were flooding simultaneously. The Titanic had been designed to survive 4 flooded compartments. The math required no advanced calculation. Thomas Andrews, the ship's chief architect, and the man who knew her blueprint better than anyone, was brought below to assess the damage. The captain walked back to the bridge alone. We want to point at a single cause, a single failure, a single moment where everything went wrong, each one reasonable on its own, each one catastrophically wrong in combination. The ice warnings were received and not dismissed. Captain Smith was not a villain. He was a product of his time. He had sailed through similar conditions dozens of times and arrived safely each time. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic broke apart and disappeared beneath the surface of the North Atlantic. The water temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. People who made it into the water without a lifeboat survived for 15 minutes at most before hypothermia shut down their hearts. 1,517 people died. 710 survived. The ship whose crew had watched the Titanic's distress rockets light up the sky and decided they were just company signals. Here's the thought that lingers. The iceberg that sank the Titanic was spotted by the lookouts at approximately 500 yards, at the ship's speed that left 37 seconds to react. If just one of those 6 warnings had changed the speed, just one. If the Mesaba's final message had made it to the bridge. If Ismay had treated the Baltic's warning as an alarm instead of a dinner conversation. If the Californian's wireless operator had stayed awake one more hour. And 1,517 people wake up on the morning of April 15th and tell the story of the night they almost didn't make it. 6 warnings, 6 messages, each one trying to reach through the noise and the pride and the assumptions and the faith in the machine. And somewhere in the quiet, frozen deep of the North Atlantic, 2.5 miles below the surface, the ship still sits. Returning to the ocean, piece by piece, year by year. The iceberg melted long ago. It was only passing through.